My name is Logan. We're going to start off with a wee film. This is a film of a poem by a guy called Charlie Gillen. He's from North Antrim, couldn't be here today. Filmed by a man called Tristan Crowe. I work a lot with Tristan and Michael Crossy. They're the two men in charge of the photography. And I think Patsy's going to...
I'm going to hit the button.
Patsy's going to play it first, so
yeah.
It only lasts 4 minutes or so.
Starting letters. Pears, red feet, stamps or cow. What will set him on my Allah? Brim, flower, valley, black next to clay, all the federation. We know the way. Bank Keep, Bank Bull, Robbins and Stewart, standing on a heather web and out of the door. Left glove, right glove, left two grave. That's Gaelic. We mount a shield. Like Jonas has scored, much to the floor. He's always dirty daytime love. There'll be stirring about how they dry. But said we'll get them by and by. We do is lit again. That's his way. He'll be up here cotton when I'm called, hey? I'm rushing in an easy. Jimmy keeps cool. Was the leisure, was the food. Like pretty cooks are in. She could work with only man. The bag of his size and she never thought. Nice pipe. White shirt in. But they're only enough lying on the slate. Like we, how young, took out the gate. Driving up the road we had the same night. Worked hard, worked down, came to him fire. All for together workers fire. Skeletal lost one, learned to me down. Hard times, get times, times far away. Me and a board on the beach beds out. Maybe big fire duty stand like that. Next to them, foot where we beat it. They're all good ever, the guys make back. I know that's best correct. over this heat is what I do. Still, life was hard at Hamely and along.
That's a poem by Charlie Gillen and filmed up in North Antrim. And like a lot of Charlie's work, it's a cry for a past. And one of the things about Ulster-Scots is it sort of harks back to an earlier time. Some of you may be aware, I have been toiling in the Ulster-Scots mines for a number of years. And when Annie asked what the title of the talk should be, I chose to echo a monthly column I used to write for the Ulster-Scots agency when it was run by the tautological chair of the agency, Lord Laird. The newsletter printed a supplement, and I was asked to contribute a rumination. Not absolutely certain that they used that turn of phrase, but it was my interpretation of Ulster-Scots words. It was published monthly, and I did that for a few years. Eventually somebody said there's enough of them gathered together and we're going to put them into a book. And I have a few copies available at the back, which you're all very welcome to get free. There are other books that you can buy, but the Word of Ulster-Scots is free. It was supposed to be printed. Nothing really came of it, and eventually somebody told me that they needed to check that it was really Ulster-Scots. So having got the deputy chair of the agency to write an introduction, and a man called James Fenton to also write an introduction, I thought that was proof enough, but they needed further proof. Anyway, I never requested the identity of this star chamber of the latter days. So I say they're available. They're available free. That's really what the talk is about today. One of the things about Ulster-Scots is people say it's bad English, people say it's Protestant Irish, people say it's bad English in a Ballymena accent. That's very upsetting to me personally. I have nothing to do with Ballymena. I'd like to draw your attention to the cosmopolitan nature of Ulster-Scots. That's not really a word that you associate with Ulster-Scots. There's a tale, I'm sure it's apocryphal, totally untrue. A newly elected MP went over to the House of Commons, and one of these fellow MPs said, "Oh, who are you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm the MP from Northern Ireland." I always said the two most boring words in the English language. He says Northern Ireland. And he said, "Oh, well, over in Northern Ireland, we have our own two boring words, Ulster-Scots." So I think, hopefully, that your presence here today gives a light to that, because I think people are interested in Ulster-Scots. They're interested in where it comes from, how it came about. And one of my sort of core contentions is that we all speak Ulster-Scots. We just don't necessarily recognize it as such. I give talks, occasional talks around the place. I was given a talk to the U3A, that's University of the Third Age, and I mentioned this, and a guy was at least well up his 70s, maybe in his 80s, and he said, "Oh, I was round at Ballyholme Post Office." He said, "An English lady came in looking for a card, and I said, 'Oh, there's a display at the back there. If you have a hope round there,' he said, 'you should find something that'll suit you.'" And she looked at him with a totally strange, and said, "What in God's name is a hope?" And I'm sure it's one of those words that we all have processed into your minds without necessarily recognising that it has its roots in Scotland. Ulster-Scots is the tongue of the rural part of the north of Ireland and suffers from the same sort of snobbery which Parisians visit on the paysans of rural France, the Madrileños inflict on the paletas of the agricultural part of España, which is mirrored in most parts of the world where there is a metropolitan elite and a hinterland which grows the food. This is, or at least was, a European convention. It was adopted around the 1500s, around the birth of the nation state, and it was often adopted in a form that was used to bring the country together. And they normally used the speech in the national capital, hence the superior feeling that Parisians feel about the way they speak. We may have come across the way Londoners regard received pronunciation from the southeast as the proper speech. And even in Northern Ireland, I think people from Belfast tend to look down their nose at people from the country who are quite obviously uneducated and speak in a very broad way. When I was at school, I learned a form of French which I'm told is only familiar to Parisians, blissfully ignorant of the wide variety of tongues and dialects spoken right across France. De Gaulle is supposed to remark, how do you govern a country with 246 varieties of cheese? The same with language. There are many different words and dialects used throughout the place. There is a shame about an uncultured tongue. An accent often derided as that of a yokel, a culshi, an unsophisticated and often uneducated underclass. But Shakespeare, I think, referred to as the rude mechanicals of A Midsummer Night's Dream. But my intention today is to expose the cosmopolitan nature of Ulster-Scots, its many and varied roots, and some of their far-flung and not so far-flung origins. Can I begin by paying tribute to the English language? We're giving so generously of their tongue, but let's not forget Irish. A language nourished and given succour in North Antrim and the glens of Antrim. When it was encouraged and nurtured by Presbyterians, a subject written about by a gentleman and scholar, Dr. Roger Blaney, who was also known as Rory Blaney, a fantastic champion of the Irish language. I recollect visiting Aris and Uachtaran with Rory and Dr. Ian Adamson, and it was quite a long receiving line. And Rory got into conversation with President Higgins and they were just lost. Anyway, they were there because President Higgins had an interest in Ulster-Scots, and I think that's to be lauded. And he remains a supporter and a friend of Ulster-Scots. Ulster-Scots speakers who've been in clabber to the Oxters are using an Irish word, clabber, meaning soft malt. People enjoying a glass of whiskey are using Irish, ishabar, and wearers of brogues, that's another Irish word that we all use quite commonly. There's quite a number of these borrowed words from Irish. And for me personally, not being a linguist or a linguistic expert, which I'm not, I look at the geography and the topography of Northern Ireland. And I see the place names, the town names, the town land names, the mountains and river names, and they're clear evidence of a close relationship between Irish and Ulster-Scots. There was a lovely councillor up in Ballymena, and he was on talkback whenever a man called David Seath used to run it. He phoned up one day to say the very sound of the Irish language made him sick to the stomach. He felt really, really upset to hear the Irish language. So I phoned in, as you do sometimes. I got straight through. I said, what does he find so upsetting about Ballymena, about Knockahullet, about Bruckshane, about Larne? Because these are all Irish words and they have their roots in Irish. And he come on, He was a clever politician. Anyway, the point is, we look at those things and we see a relationship with Irish. And obviously, what happened was people came over here and they said, what do you call that hill there? And they said, oh, that's Flemish, not the whatever. And it was adopted. English is a magpie language. It's a language that presses German into service. We use Schadenfreude as often and as accurately as any Berliner. And we utilize Hindi words like bungalow and veranda when we declare that a hot toddy is tickety boo. Those are all Hindi phrases brought over from the age of empire. I like to say it as a certain je ne sais quoi to the way we speak. Or like shach, long claimed as a standard berry for Ulster-Scots, and I think also claimed as Irish. It actually has its roots in Middle English, Elizabethan English. I use the traditional spelling, SH, which is the way we spell it in our family. Another with the like of English styling is the word dishables. Some of you may be aware of dishables, but it might be referred to nowadays as comfies. That's the attire that, particularly during the lockdown when it's very popular, people wore casual attire right at home. The odd time making a foray out to the shop for milk and bread. The odd time to Asda or Tesco for the weekly shop. It actually comes from medieval French, or possibly not so medieval French. Déshabillé, meaning partially dressed, casually dressed, or according to some sources, an alternate for negligee. Not that I can recollect anything in the nightclothes line made of anything flimsier than sackcloth or possibly flannel. I recollect many years ago, James Fenton and I, a great author and a fantastic expert in Ulster-Scots, we went to Limavady, where he was the guest of the local council, an institution that's no longer with us. And he gave a talk, as was his own, about Ulster-Scots, and the sterling and painstaking work he carried out in recording, documenting, and tracking down the many and varied usages of words in Ulster-Scots. Jim Fenton was from the Oliver Cromwell school. Cromwell's a man who told the artist painting his portrait to paint them warts and all, and Jim loved that unvarnished approach. He applied that attitude to Ulster-Scots. He was talking about footer. I'm sure many of you have heard the term footer. The term that comes from medieval French. Medieval French word foutre, brought over here, part of the old alliance between France and Scotland. And the literal translation, it was a slang term for the physical act of love. So when people use the term fitter about or fittering about, they're actually employing something much earthier and maybe stronger. Jim recalled explaining this to a Presbyterian minister who swore on the spot, Kerry Schlock, that the word fitter would never cross his lips again. Language is a fluid and flexible medium, constantly undergoing change. The story I like to tell about it is King Charles II and Christopher Wren, the architect who designed and built St. Paul's, a building which remained the tallest building in London until 1963 or 4. All artists love a word of praise. Wren said to the king, he said, what do you think of St. Paul's Cathedral? And he says, it's awful, and it's awful, meaning it fills me with awe, and it is monstrous, meaning it's absolutely huge. But if you said to somebody today that was monstrous and awful, it would mean something very critical. The king meant it in 2 words of praise. So I believe I detect something of the Ulster-Scots language in the Australian phrase tall poppy syndrome. That's the part of Australian speech which expresses the urge to return people who have wandered to heady heights to the solid ground upon which they started out on. The Ulster-Scots equivalent is forgetting the bowl you were baked in. I chuckle about the remark aimed at brides-to-be who were getting perhaps a little too full of themselves, overly carried away with their exalted place in the forthcoming matrimonial ceremony. Older, wiser heads might be heard opining that she'll no look so fancy when she's straddled there the pole. However, in exactly the same way that I have to explain to my grandchildren what a telephone box is and what in God's name is it, the pole is long departed due to the introduction of indoor plumbing. The phrase continues on, just as hurtful nowadays as it was then. I'm very fond of Lord Rockingham's 11, who introduced me to Scots when they unleashed a timeless classic called Hoots Man, containing the line, "There's a miss, bliss, a bit of this." The song was written by a Scotsman rejoicing in the name of Harry Robertson, occasionally traded as Harry Robinson, and the 11th figure musician and saxophonist called Benny Green, who later became a broadcaster, a cricket author, and a musicologist. And I was a big fan, but that's a digression. Hus is ostensibly Scots. It actually has its roots in what's known technically as Proto-Germanic, and that is linked to Scandinavian and it's linked to Dutch. It means the same as we say, hus, meaning house. And people might talk with the big hus. That's the, well, I'm sure there's better names for it. It used to be called a lunatic asylum. And if you were under a lot of pressure at home, and my poor mother was a mother of 5, used to often say, "You'll hear me in the big house." There's also the wee house, which is sometimes plumb, often not. I think it's called the smallest room in the house, and it's the toilet. As well as the German and Proto-Germanic, the Scandinavians also came and they named and pillaged. I don't know what else they got up to. Despite my advanced years, I often have to remind my grandchildren that I wasn't actually around at that time. The Vikings observed or became aware of a strong current in the sea loch when they visited some of their pre-EasyJet and Ryanair weekend breaks to our beautiful country. They dubbed it Strangford, meaning a strong current, and that actually stuck, and it's there to this day. The relatively recent predilection for television programs about Scandinavian crime introduced me, or more accurately, reintroduced me to a term very familiar to a North Antrim Ulster-Scots speaker, polis. You see it written on the side of the cars. I think it's mainly Norwegian, but it may be Swedish. And that's exactly the way we spoke about it. And if you needed the long arm of the law, it was invoked, less frequently involved, but sometimes required on a weekend night to resolve disputes, which may have strayed into the physical, oft times involving the devil's butter. When the drink sent the wits out, you may have come across that expression. The polis were an extreme measure, more threatened as the ultimate sanction, because alcohol had the anesthetic effect which enabled people to inflict severe damage on each other without immediately experiencing pain. You often saw people bloody. I think there was an example of what they used the other night from Ballymoney. I'm not sure if they were actually speaking Ulster-Scots when they unleashed it. But the point is, the language is there. It's drawn from a wide variety of sources. It's got the name of being the language of the ignorant and the uneducated, That's a hangover from a long time ago. I think things have changed. I think there's a much greater propensity to hear regional accents right across all the national broadcasters, and there's a pride in this, which I think is quite important. So in the same sense that my friend from the University of the Third Age was involved, he didn't know, or he's personally encountered, didn't know that hoke was an Ulster-Scots word, actually a Scots word, and brought over here. So that's the premise of today. That's what a word of Ulster-Scots is about. We speak it, we use it every day, sometimes more often, and we really should rejoice in it. It's part of the uniqueness of Northern Ireland, and it mixes that bit different as the world grows ever more homogenized. The internet, Netflix, satellite television, these things make us all the same. Ulster-Scots is one of those things that makes us a wee bit different, and we should be very proud of. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Are we going to have another wee film? Okay. And there's some books at the back. You can buy the ones that are for sale, but if you don't want to buy, you can get the free ones. No, that's the last one. Skirting edges, by the way, means swatting edges. And that was the main occupation you did when you were in the moss, cutting peats. It was swatting edges.
Sorry.
It's okay, yeah, let it go. This is called the South Farming Life. It's again a hymn to an earlier age, fan of Charlie's, and unfortunately he can't be here today. But this is what his poem called the South Farming Life.
Oh no, it's not. It's the one blade. What's it called again? I forget.
Well, we'll find out what it is.
Sit down, yes.
Let's show certain life, the Jerry Young. Let's show certain life is strong. That's sure nobody's ever got. What we left and sleep and stupid, I didn't get out of that. Why do you think I should throw it all through it and get a wee job in the tune? Then I hear the wee birds are all calling, and I see me here for Ballerine. Aye, one is a telling me it's funny, but sure that's the way you're a man. And the virgins and where they get things. I believe that's our birthday. Well, we get on his pencil and his skirt collar cutting his throat. He, I'll stick to the grape and the borough. Do you think I'm not joining me too? Should we took us dialect and we master the water? We may honor me hurt, but it was from the other. Them trim boys, they leave to the club, and the scrape of the factory hustle. I think a man of praise for his seed, the wee dirties out there in the thrustles. The shopkeeper's music's around the tower, and the master sees good through the stir of the mouth. And the banker sits tooting at other folks' money. I'm out in the fields where the bees hit and honey. I'm feared to hear the world is not changing, and I know costly crap anymore. Little sound like your late, you can just eat if you don't play, and you need the merry share. Aye, the who's in North beggar, the cry of the northern train, and the cry of even cry bake your neighbor, and I'm going for Ireland. You get deeper in debt and pressure. Talk to the doctor's son. Why might you make your neighbor, so I'm not carrying life up your head? Spot, look here, I straight for the firm, on the way to storing a man. I'm only trying to be trendy. Look still by yourself, or you can. But I need a bird mass race to destruction. Stay pretty, that's rock race to fail. Mother Nature needs looking at. With her help, she could still do again. Pay your vows. Spend time with your family. No money to me, it's yourself. There'll be money when we're out in the graveyard. Where money's to get non-new animals.
That's another Charlie Gillen poem, but I thought they were a wee bit gloomy. So I'm going to give you a poem of mine. I learned it in an Orange Hall down the Irish Peninsula. I'm sorry, I didn't learn the story. It was told by a guy called Willie Cromie. And he told the story, and I said, "Boy, that's a great story. Would you mind if I wrote a poem about it?" He said, "Oh, I want to go." So it's called The Local District Master. The local district master took a danner down the tune. His hair was a guide on got and needed cut. So he found a handy barber's and he waited in the queue. The barber caught his name and did his son. The barber says, "You're getting tidied up before the 12th. And no, he says, "I'm going to miss the day. I'll not be at the field," he says, "nor walking down the road. The year the wife and me will be away. For nearly 40 years, so I didn't miss the 12th. No matter what the weather, dry or wet. But the year I retired, and she has to hair spake, the 12th of the year, we're gone somewhere yet." Boys and dears, the barber says, you're going to be feeling odd. Now see your brethren and family on the road. I'm gaily ducked. You'll not be there. The local district master, half abroad. That lays where we're gone. She loves on Roman art. She loves them statues, paintings and mosaics. I like it all myself, he says. It's perfect stuff to see. But she wants to see it all, for heaven's sake. We're after Florence, Turin, Siena, even Rome. We see the Leaning Tower and Hay Cruise. The barber snared away, he couldn't hardly see her speak. We shocked at all this disconcerting news. The cutting day and the master left the days of their chores. The next week, him and her flew to the sun. Another couple of weeks or so, they're back at him again. And in the tin, he took another run. He seen his barber in a bit and stopped to hear yarn. You're him again, what did you see out there? The master look was perfect, getting gay at day. For 12 long weeks, we didn't have a care. We seen Michelangelo's David and Al Cellini's Gold. We sailed in big black gondolas to the bridge of Sighs. The Leaning Tower of Pisa went down the Spanish Steps, and Florence St. Colossus, such as size. We went to see the Vatican to finish up our tour. Peter's Square in the centre of the town. We wandered where open myths, and all we heard and seen. The Pope himself was yarning, walking round. He come in our direction and he spoke to yins near me. Folk had bowed their heads and I did too. But then he come to me and spoke in English clear so I understood what the pontiff had to say. He come for next I sneaked a peek. A look came out his face, both shocked and sad. He stared gay hard and spoke gay clear. Who in God's name cut your hair that bad?